They said it couldn't fly like that. They said the airframe would tear itself apart. They said no bomber should ever hunt ships at wave height. But in the Pacific, rules didn't matter. Somewhere over black water and burning steel, a single B-25 gunship was about to prove that engineers don't decide what's impossible. Men do. And in just 3 days, 12 Japanese ships would vanish beneath the ocean, not by fleet action, not by torpedoes, but by a bomber turned into something far more terrifying. This is not a legend. This is not a theory. This is a dark war record. The mechanics knew something was wrong the moment they saw the nose. B-25 Mitchell bombers were not supposed to look like this. They were medium bombers, clean lines, glass noses, designed to drop payloads from altitude and leave before anyone knew what happened. But this one didn't look like a bomber anymore. The transparent nose was gone. In its place, solid metal, steel plates bolted where glass used to be, and emerging from that steel guns. Too many guns. A mechanic ran his hand along the nose and counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns, mounted not for defense but for attack. Someone behind him laughed nervously. This thing's gonna fly straight into hell. The engineers had already filed their objections. The B-25 center of gravity was wrong now. Too much weight forward. Recoil stress untested. Cooling airflow disrupted. Structural vibration unknown. On paper, it was a death trap, but paper didn't fly missions in the Pacific. The idea came from desperation. Japanese shipping had adapted. Convoys hugged coastlines. Anti-aircraft guns ringed every deck. High-altitude bombing had become useless, too inaccurate, too predictable. Every attack meant aircraft lost for little gain. So someone asked the forbidden question, what if we don't bomb them? What if we hunt them? The answer was a B-25 that flew low. So low the spray from waves hit the cockpit glass. So low that gunners could see faces on decks. And when the first test run happened, everyone watching expected disaster. The engines roared. The aircraft rolled. The nose dipped dangerously forward. For a second, it looked like the bomber would bury itself into the runway. Then it lifted. Barely. The mechanics didn't cheer. They stared, because they understood something chilling. If this thing crashed, it wouldn't be because of enemy fire. It would be because it was never meant to exist. The crew was briefed in silence. No speeches. No promises. They were told exactly what would happen. You will fly below mast height. You will not climb. You will not turn away once you commit. If your engines fail, you die. If your guns jam, you die. If they see you early, you die. No one stepped back. The pilot studied the map. Japanese transports. Fuel tankers. Troop carriers. Targets that kept the war alive. The first mission launched at dawn. The ocean was calm. Too calm. Perfect for enemy lookouts. The B-25 dropped to wave height minutes after takeoff. At that altitude, the sky feels wrong. Claustrophobic. The horizon disappears. The aircraft feels heavy, like it wants to sink. Then the lookout spotted them, tiny flashes from the decks below. Anti-aircraft fire erupted, not upward, but sideways. Tracers stitched the air in front of the nose. The pilot didn't pull up. He pushed forward. The guns opened. 4 forward .50s roared as one. The nose shook violently. Shell casings slammed into the fuselage and vanished into the sea. The deck of the first ship turned into chaos. Gunners fell. Structures shattered. Fuel drums exploded into fireballs. The B-25 didn't slow. It passed through the smoke like a predator. Behind it, the ship burned. Not sunk yet, but dying. They came around for another pass. Engine temperature climbing. Oil pressure unstable. The aircraft screaming in protest. The engineers had been right about one thing. The B-25 hated this, but it did it anyway. By the end of the first mission, 3 ships were crippled. 1 sank before sunset. The crew landed with bullet holes everywhere. Fuel lines nicked. Control cables frayed. One more hit would have ended it. The mechanics stared again, this time in disbelief. The engineers didn't say anything. They didn't need to, because now, everyone understood what had been created. Not a bomber, not a fighter, a flying execution weapon. And this was only the beginning. In the next 72 hours, the ocean would turn into a graveyard, and the B-25 gunship would earn a reputation so terrifying that Japanese sailors would abandon ships at the sound of engines alone. But that comes next. The war had just learned a new way to die. By the second day, the ocean no longer looked empty. It looked alert. Japanese convoys changed formation overnight. Ships spread farther apart. Deck guns stayed manned even in daylight. Lookouts scanned the horizon for shapes flying too low to be aircraft. Word had traveled faster than radio. Something was hunting them. The B-25 crew felt it the moment they crossed the coastline. The sky wasn't quiet anymore. Black bursts of flak bloomed even before the aircraft was spotted. Blind warning fire, fired out of fear rather than accuracy. Tracers skimmed the wave tops, skipping like stones. This time, the enemy wasn't surprised. The pilot knew what that meant. No clean runs, no easy kills. Only speed, brutality, and commitment. They dropped lower, so low that the propellers pulled spray into the engines. So low that the aircraft shadow raced across the decks of ships before the guns fired. The first target was a tanker, a floating heart of fuel, slow and heavily guarded. The approach angle was wrong. Crossfire from 2 escorts converged directly ahead. Any rational pilot would break off. This one didn't. The nose guns fired early. Wooden superstructures disintegrated. Gun crews vanished in red mist and splintered metal. A cannon round punched through the left wing. The aircraft lurched. Warning lights flickered. Still no pull-up. At point-blank range, the bombardier released the bombs, not dropped, but skipped. They bounced once, twice, then disappeared beneath the tanker's hull. The explosion didn't roar. It heaved. The sea rose. Steel peeled outward. Flames crawled up the ship like living things. The B-25 passed through the fireball. Paint blistered. Canopy glass cracked. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke. They weren't celebrating. They were counting what still worked. Engine 1, stable. Engine 2, rough. Hydraulics, leaking. Ammunition, half gone. Then came the escorts, fighters. Japanese Zeros dropped from altitude like hawks. This was never supposed to happen. The B-25 was not meant to dogfight. The gunners swung their weapons upward. One Zero came in too fast. Overconfident, a burst from the dorsal turret ripped the wing clean off. The fighter vanished into the sea without a sound. Another Zero lined up from behind. Tracer fire chewed through the tail. Control response slowed. The pilot shoved the throttles forward and skimmed the waves. The Zeros hesitated. They didn't like flying that low. One mistake meant death without impact, just water-swallowing metal. That hesitation saved them. The B-25 escaped into cloud cover, bleeding fuel, trailing smoke. They landed at a forward strip that barely qualified as a runway. When the engine stopped, the aircraft sagged, like a wounded animal finally allowed to collapse. Ground crews counted damage silently. More holes than skin. Structural ribs exposed. One engine mount cracked. An engineer finally spoke. It shouldn't have made it back. No one disagreed. They worked through the night, reinforcing mounts, rerouting lines, loading more ammunition. By dawn, the B-25 was ready again. By dusk, 4 more ships were burning. Transports this time. Troop carriers. Men leapt into the water not because the ships were sinking, but because the sound of that aircraft meant death was seconds away. Japanese commanders issued new orders. Shoot first. Shoot low. Shoot anything that sounds wrong. Fighters were reassigned solely to hunt the gunship. Bait convoys were deployed. They wanted it dead, because in just 2 days, the impossible bomber had done more damage than weeks of conventional raids. And the worst part? The crew wasn't finished. The 3rd day was coming, and by then the enemy would be ready. Or so they thought. By the 3rd morning, the sky felt watched. Not scanned. Not patrolled. Watched. The radio crackled with reports from other units. Convoys rerouted, escorts doubled, fighter squadrons repositioned along the coastline like traps waiting to be sprung. The Japanese knew the pattern now. Low altitude. Direct approach. Relentless forward fire. So they prepared the only answer they had left. Ambush. The B-25 lifted off before sunrise, engines already sounding tired. Metal fatigue didn't care about courage. Neither did physics. The crew felt it in the vibrations, subtle, wrong, like a headache that wouldn't go away. The target area came into view. Too quiet. No scattered ships, no lone tanker. Instead, tight formation. 6 vessels, perfect spacing. Guns already trained outward, and above them, barely visible in the pale sky, fighters circling high, patient. They'd been waiting. The pilot didn't turn back. There was no fuel margin to retreat, no altitude to climb, and turning would expose the aircraft's weakest angle. The only option was forward. Anti-aircraft fire erupted immediately, not wild. Measured. Shells walked toward the nose like footsteps. The first hit shattered the right engine cowling. The engine kept running, but angry now, coughing fire. The forward guns answered. At this range, accuracy wasn't a skill, it was inevitability. Deck guns vanished. Crew positions collapsed. Wood, steel, and flesh exploded together. But this time, the ships didn't panic. They fired everything. The air became solid. A shell detonated beneath the fuselage. The B-25 slammed downward, barely missing the water. Warning alarms screamed. The bombardier shouted, "Bomb release jammed." One bomb hung in the bay, half released, half waiting to kill them all. The pilot leveled out at wave height again. The gunners screamed into the intercom, "Fighters incoming. Zero's dove. Not 1, not 2, 5. The tail gunner fired until the barrels glowed. 1 Zero burst into flames. Another pulled up at the last second, its pilot finally understanding what kind of monster he'd chased too low. Tracer fire tore through the cockpit. Glass shattered. The co-pilot went silent. Not dead. Worse. Unmoving. The pilot flew with one hand, the other gripping the yoke hard enough to draw blood. The bombs finally released. 2 skipped. 1 struck. The explosion lifted an entire ship out of the sea. When it came back down, it split. The shockwave slammed the B-25 sideways. Metal screamed. A structural beam cracked. For a heartbeat, the aircraft wasn't flying. It was falling with style. The pilot forced it level. The right engine failed completely. Propeller froze. The aircraft yawed violently. Every engineer's warning came true at once. Too heavy. Too damaged. Too wrong. They limped away on one engine. Zeros pursued, but cautiously now. They'd seen what happened to those who got close. Fuel pressure dropped. The ocean stretched endlessly below. Then land. Barely. The B-25 touched down hard. Landing gear collapsed. The aircraft slid, sparks spraying until it stopped in silence. No cheering. No shouting. Just breathing. Ground crews ran toward the wreck. They counted the holes. Then they counted the ships. Radio confirmations arrived one by one. 5 sunk today. 7 yesterday. 12 ships in 3 days. Convoys halted. Routes abandoned. Supplies delayed. For the first time in that sector, the sea belonged to silence. Engineers stood over the wrecked nose. Twisted metal. Cracked mounts. Burnt paint. One of them finally spoke. It shouldn't have survived even one mission. The pilot sat on the ground, staring at the aircraft. Neither should we. The gunship would never fly again, but it didn't need to. Its work was already done, because what it proved could never be undone. Bombers didn't have to stay high. Ships weren't safe just because they had guns. And sometimes, breaking the rules didn't get you killed. It rewrote the war, and now, every Air Force was watching. The wreck never left the airstrip. They didn't tow it away. They didn't cover it. They let it sit where it died. Pilots from other squadrons walked past it slowly, tracing bullet holes with their eyes, counting scars like a ledger of debt the enemy had paid in full. Word spread faster than orders ever could. A bomber that hunted like a fighter. A gunship that didn't drop death from the clouds, but dragged it across the sea. Within weeks, requests flooded headquarters. Forward-firing guns required. Solid noses preferred. Low-level attack configuration, engineers argued. Commanders hesitated. Then, shipping reports came in. Japanese convoys were moving only at night. Fuel shortages appeared at forward bases. Islands went quiet, not from peace but from hunger. The tactic worked, so they built more. B-25s were pulled from standard units and stripped down. Glass noses removed. Armor added. Gun mounts welded where bomb sites used to be. The aircraft grew heavier, meaner, angrier. They called them gunships now. Pilots trained differently. No gentle climbs. No wide turns. They practiced flying by instinct, reading wave patterns, judging distance by spray, learning how fear sounded through engine noise. Mistakes weren't corrected. They were buried. The Japanese adapted again. Convoys scattered further. Decoys deployed. Guns layered at different heights. But something had changed. The sea no longer felt safe. A ship could be hit without warning. From an aircraft too low to track, too fast to predict, too brutal to stop. Crews abandoned decks at the sound of engines alone. Some fired wildly. Some froze. Some jumped. The psychological damage spread faster than the physical. Meanwhile, the original crew was reassigned. No medals yet, no speeches, just quiet acknowledgement. They'd crossed a line most pilots never came back from. The pilot was grounded temporarily, medical reasons. No one argued. His hands shook when he wasn't flying. At night, he heard engines where there were none. The co-pilot recovered, but never flew combat again. Engineers studied the wreckage endlessly. They measured stress fractures, mapped recoil damage, counted failure points. Every flaw became data. Every mistake became doctrine. The aircraft industry changed its thinking. Aircraft weren't just platforms. They were weapons in themselves. By late war, skip bombing, strafing runs, and low-level attacks became standard. What had once been impossible became policy. But it came with a cost. Loss rates were brutal. Low altitude left no margin for error. One lucky shell could erase everything. Pilots knew they flew anyway. Because the gunship had proven something terrifying. Fear traveled faster than bullets. And once the enemy believed the sky itself wanted them dead, the war tilted. The ocean became quieter, not peaceful, just empty. And somewhere, rusting on a forgotten strip, a ruined B-25 still sat in the sun, its guns silent, its mission complete. The engineers were right. It was impossible, right up until it happened. By the time the gunships became common, the Pacific War had already changed its face. Japanese shipping lanes were no longer lines on a map. They were guesses, risks, gambles made in desperation. Fuel shortages crippled forward airfields. Troops arrived late, or not at all. Isolated garrisons learned what starvation felt like long before surrender ever came up. The B-25 gunship wasn't the only reason, but it was the one sailors feared most, because it didn't announce itself like high bombers. It didn't roar overhead and disappear. It stayed. It came back. It flew so low that men could see the pilot's helmet flash in the sun seconds before the guns tore their world apart. Veterans would later say the sound was wrong. Not the thunder of bombs, not the whine of fighters. A heavy, grinding roar, too slow, too close, like something large and angry skimming the water, hunting by instinct. By late 1944, Japanese commanders issued grim orders. If gunships appeared, scatter immediately. Do not hold formation. Do not wait for orders. Survival over discipline. That alone told the story. The original pilot returned to duty, but not to the gunship. He trained others now. He taught them what couldn't be written down. How to feel when an engine was about to fail. How to read flak bursts like weather. How to commit fully because hesitation killed faster than enemy fire. He never talked about the 3 days. Not directly. But sometimes, during briefings, he would pause when pointing at the ocean on the map, as if counting ships that weren't there anymore. The engineers who once called the idea suicidal now refined it. Stronger mounts, better cooling. Reinforced frames, still dangerous. Still brutal, just survivable enough. Losses continued. Crews died doing the same thing the original B-25 had done first, flying where aircraft weren't meant to fly, trusting machines pushed beyond design, accepting that escape wasn't guaranteed. But the effect was undeniable. Every sunk ship meant less fuel. Every delayed convoy meant fewer aircraft in the air. Every frightened sailor meant hesitation. By 1945, the Japanese Navy was a shadow, not defeated in one decisive battle, but eroded, stripped piece by piece, and buried beneath waves without ceremony. The gunship tactic didn't win the war alone, but it shortened it, it bled it, it made the cost unbearable. When the war finally ended, there were no parades for the gunships, no monuments to low-level attacks. Most of the aircraft were scrapped. Others rusted into the ground at forgotten airstrips. The original wreck was dismantled quietly. No plaque, no display, just twisted metal loaded onto trucks. The pilot watched it go. He didn't stop it. Some things weren't meant to be preserved, because what that aircraft represented wasn't victory. It was necessity, a moment when survival demanded crossing lines no one wanted to cross, and doing something everyone said could not be done. Only one part of the story remained: the end. When the war ended, silence returned faster than anyone expected. Airfields emptied. Runways cracked. Engines that had screamed day and night went quiet, as if afraid to be heard again. The B-25 gunships were grounded one by one. Some were flown home. Some were stripped for parts. Most were simply left behind. Too damaged, too worn, too haunted to justify the effort. Official reports reduced everything to numbers. Ships sunk. Tonnage destroyed. Sorties flown. No report captured what really happened out there. What it felt like to fly so low that the sea tried to pull you in. What it sounded like when bullets hit aluminum at arm's length. What it meant to commit to an attack knowing there was no room to climb, no place to hide, and no second chance. The engineers closed their notebooks. The math worked now. Recoil tolerances understood. Structural limits mapped. Design changes validated. What had once been impossible was now doctrine. Future aircraft would carry heavier guns. Attack planes would be built for low-level punishment. Close-range firepower became a design priority, not a gamble. But no manual ever explained the cost. The pilot returned home. No speeches, no spotlight, just another man with another uniform folded away. He never flew that low again. Sometimes, when asked about the war, he would say only this: the airplane did what it had to do, nothing more. The sea kept its secrets. Wrecks lay scattered across the Pacific floor, 12 ships from 3 days and hundreds more from the tactic that followed. Steel skeletons covered in coral. Guns pointed at nothing. Cargo holds filled with silence. History moved on. Jets replaced propellers. Missiles replaced guns. But every modern close air support doctrine, every low-altitude strike philosophy carried the fingerprint of those early gunships. Not as inspiration, as warning. Because once, when survival demanded it, Engineers were ignored, rules were broken, and a bomber became something else entirely. And it worked, at a cost no one wanted to remember. That was the lesson of the B-25 gunship. Not that impossible things can be done, but that when they are done, they leave scars long after the war ends. War doesn't change because of heroes alone. It changes because someone, somewhere, runs out of safe options. The B-25 gunship was never meant to exist. It was built from desperation, flown through fear, and remembered in silence. This wasn't a story about victory. It was a record of necessity. A moment in history when survival outweighed design, and the sky learned a new way to kill. This was a dark war record, and some records were never meant to be forgotten, only understood.